Welcome, everybody, to Radicalized, where truth survives, and we always have your back. I'm Heidi Cuda, and I'm here with Jim Stewartson and High Fidelity, my favorite peeps, really, quite frankly. We are going to talk about the very real Russian operation to install Trump with the author of American Kompromat and House of Trump and House of Putin, Craig Unger. Unprecedented. We have a guest coming on for the third time, which is very rare, but no better person to have the conversation about the breaking news from the week. Correct, gentlemen?
Craig must be just sitting there going, told you.
I told you so. Wish you would have listened. Anyway.
I mean, it's crazy. It's like, one good bit of news, is that he's currently trending. So that's excellent.
Yeah, that's very exciting. Yes, very exciting. Yeah, well, that is something that I've written about many times. The truth eventually prevails. It just takes a minute. All right, gentlemen, let's just go ahead and jump right into Front Loaded.
Front Loaded.
This just in, bombshell.
Bombshell. I like it.
Confessions of a Fox Blonde. Yeah, on the 10th anniversary of walking out the door from Fox 11 Los Angeles, I wrote this story, Confessions of a Fox Blonde, and I would have never have been able to write it without the support of the Byline Supplement team. They made me feel very safe, and but it's important. We live in a post-privacy world, and our personal lives and journeys are exploited by those who try to disparage the kind of work that we do. So we here at RadPod, we just own it. And that was me owning it. Yeah?
I would actually like to bring up a point you just made me realize. Out of all the things I've been attacked for, I've never been attacked for my technical articles that I've written on the web out there.
I wonder why. Wouldn't want to bring anyone's attention to your talent, right? I was telling Jim, who has not yet read the article, that it's the only place that you will ever hear a sentence written that while I was out at a carnival producing a story on Chewy the Wolf Boy, a guitar strumming hirsute, and then you have to read the article. But yeah, I had a lot of fun.
I just want to ask him about hair care.
He was really sweet. He's now Chewy the Wolf Man. So, but then he was Chewy the Wolf Boy.
We could discuss tips.
Yeah, he was very sweet. Somewhere on the interwebs, there's a picture of me and Chewy. But it kind of, it's an indicator of the fact that I would do very serious investigative work, which I talk about, and then I would do the not so serious. But it's fun, and I feel liberated and grateful. So. And there's a moment where I talk about how toward the end of my tenure, I would wake up screaming like Frank Sinatra in the Manchurian Candidate. And why that matters is we're going to talk about the Manchurian Candidate with Craig Unger. So there you go. So moving on, guys, I just want to thank everybody who's supporting my new magazine, Betty Dangerous. Yesterday, our bi-monthly meeting featured Wes Clark Jr. I always try to have a special guest. I'm bringing this one up, Watch Films Fight Fascism, because I'm going to be unlocking this for 24 hours starting now. And the reason I'm doing that is because not everybody can afford a subscription, but everybody needs this information. And one of the films I mentioned, of course, is Jim Stewartson's very own American Mindfuck, which is a very important film to understand what we are under.
Available for free on the web, I might add. For free.
Yes, and I linked to it.
And on Twitter. The whole thing, I put it in chunks all on Twitter.
So I watched them. I watched them all. It was a nice refresher. It's actually...
Neener, trolls.
Speaking of trolls...
Can't stop the signal, Mal.
There's one other article that I want to bring people's attention to, because I just want to remind everybody that kindness is contagious. And if everybody can remember to be a bit kinder in this time of heightened stress, that kind of has a ripple effect. And yesterday, I was able to do an act of kindness, and then someone did an act of kindness for me, and then it became this beautiful virtuous circle. So just don't forget that, because we're in a lot of pain. This has been a very painful week, and that type of pain is an opportunity for foreign states who are our enemies to wedge us all apart. But if we come together and kindness and love and beauty, that's my hippy dippy side, but I think it's important. Lastly,
there's a serious component to that, right? It's a war on kindness. It is.
Yeah.
This is people trying to eliminate the idea that it's good to be kind to others.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, you look in the entire fucking cult, and what it is a lack of kindness, right? Except to the people inside of their little cult, right?
Well, it's the
So
in-group.
I don't think
dynamic.
it's ever frivolous or woo to bring up the idea of being empathic or kind to other human beings. So thank you.
Thanks, Jim.
Empathetic, because if I was empathic, I'd be reading your mind. Anyway.
Well, a lot of empathetic people are empaths, so the two go hand in hand. So thank you for that, Jim. And the last thing I would like to bring everyone's attention to in Front Loaded is something I brought up in our Rad Pod and Chill episode on Thursday. I want everybody to please read every word of Timothy Snyder's latest Substack, The Specter of 2016, and please share it with everyone you know, even those who don't believe Russia, because of, as we're saying on this episode, yes. That article that Tim Snyder wrote, who of course is a Yale professor who wrote on tyranny and has been at the forefront of this since April of 2016. I think it's really, really important that we don't blow past this, which is really what we're dedicating this entire episode to. So in the lead, I'll just read it. We are on the edge of a spy scandal with major implications for how we understand the Trump administration, our national security, and ourselves.
Can I remind everyone of what Ruth Ben-Ghiat said is there will be massive attempts to memory hole this entire thing, because that's what fascists need to come to power. Do not let them memory hole it. Do not look away. Pay attention, please.
I want to bring up another thing that Timothy Snyder said, which is when the fascists start, when they attack our job collectively, the number one thing that we cannot do is panic. Right? That's what they want. They want to create shock and panic and disruption. And they're going to try all kinds of stuff. And I just want to make sure that, because we're going to talk about it, there's a lot of very, very big cracks in the foundation right now showing up. And the reaction to that, the counter, the whiplash is going to be very dramatic. And I just want people to remember, stay calm. You are not crazy. We'll get through it.
Thank you for that, Jim. I like how there's a kind of a theme that's emerging. Yes, this is all very serious, but yes, we are in it together, and to keep our kindness and our wits about us. So I love that. I mentioned during our Craig Unger interview Melissa Jo Peltier's film where she interviewed a bunch of ex-Trump supporters. It's a very important film. I finally watched it. I'm so grateful to her for her patience, because I kept promising I would, and finally I pulled like 2 late nights and I watched it. But the takeaway is the cult, even though it's shrinking, we know the cult of Trump is shrinking, it's still there. The cognitive dissonance that we talk about is still there. When 40 people in line at a Trump rally are interviewed and all of them say the same thing, that Trump never lied to us once, that is our challenge. And that is why we do this show. And one at a time, we're going to bring them back. We're going to do it in the most loving, kind way we can, because the alternative is not good. So, all right, that's front loaded, guys.
Word phrase of the week this week. I decided to go with kind of a basic one because I think there's some people, I just said the word fascist. I don't think people understand what fascism really is. So I'm gonna go with this definition. It's the dictionary definition. I'm gonna add a couple things. Fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as the fascisti, that exalts nation and often race above the individual, and that stands for a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial, and I would add often corrupt leader, severe economic and social regimentation, such as, we should have one religion here in the United States. That would be severe social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition and those who would stand as dissidents against the regime.
Thank you for that, Hi-Fi. I think it's really important that we start always having boilerplate language and boilerplate paragraphs for those just tuning in to this kind of subject matter, because we want to make sure we don't lose anybody. And before Jim makes his point, I do want to say Ruth Ben-Ghiat, the nation's foremost expert on Italian fascism, always says that invariably these guys come to power to hide their corruption. So just wanted to make sure I made that point.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's kind of a simpler version of this, which is fascism is the accumulation of power at the expense of human beings, right?
Brilliant.
So if you can look at individuals as fascists too, right? Individuals who create around them these organizations and movements and feelings, which are directed, which benefit them at the expense of others. So you lie to somebody about something in order to get them to do something.
Yeah.
You're fucking fascist.
Yeah.
You are accumulating power at the expense of other human beings. So yes, politically, geopolitically, that I think that definition is correct. But I would also say that it is reasonable to think of fascism as a human trait that can be exercised at many different levels of power.
Thanks, gentlemen. All right, why it matters.
Why does it matter? Why does it matter? Why high fidelity?
First story this week, why it matters. Gee, imagine that. And this story comes to us from Mother Jones. We tried to call top donors to George Santos's campaign. Many don't seem to exist. I don't know how long I've been saying this, but I would like to point out just a couple things. Here in 2021, Proud Boys saw waves of contributions. If you read through this article, specifically, there's a part right down here where they tried to contact a bunch of the donors on Give, Send, Go, and the vast majority did not respond. And those who did respond responded with vitriol and propaganda. I would also like to point out that my work that was done many, many moons ago concerning the Freedom Convoy and Give, Send, Go, you notice that there's a massive number of possibly fake and duplicate emails. Why does this matter? One of the things we're going to talk about is the money laundering. Because, as we have pointed out on this show repeatedly, information warfare, cognitive warfare, hybrid warfare, it is all warfare, and war costs money. That's why it matters.
says.
Yeah, and you know what else they have in warfare? They have fucking chaos agents and infiltrators and compromised people that find their way into power. For example, George fucking Santos, who is like the most comical fucking op on planet Earth, right? Like lies about fucking everything, all sorts of Russian connections, and ended up in fucking Congress. And the GQP is going to do jack shit because they like it. They want it. The whole point is to have people like George Santos in government.
That's right. And I don't think it's funny because A, I'm embarrassed at how the fourth estate is treating this. And B, it's very dangerous to have chaos agents in Congress. And C, I'm really freaking tired of these theater craft, Russian funded bullshittery people distracting from truth in America. So
next story this week, we're going to talk about the dorks of the rings.
Oh
the dorks of the rings. This story comes to us from Capital in Maine.
Wait a minute. Is this a Peter Thiel moment or am I just tripping?
Oh, hi. Thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
Why, yes. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Thank you for pointing that out. So this story comes to us, the right-wing rings of power, or as I prefer to call them, the dorks of the rings. This story talks about how Peter Thiel and Palmer Luckey and a bunch of the PayPal Bratva and a huge segment of people who are attached to the intellectual dark web, they have taken the series of tomes written by J.R.R. Tolkien, and they have turned it into a screed that allows them to justify all the terrible things that they're doing to humanity right now. And they are so wrapped up in this narrative that Peter Thiel has one of his companies named after a sword from the Lord of the Rings. And they would say, oh, well, he didn't start Anduril. That was Palmer Luckey. I would point you out to the second paragraph here in which Founders Fund, Andreessen Horowitz, 8VC, which is Joseph Lonsdale, all of these people are part of this Dork of the Rings cult. Speaking of... Oh, yeah, here we go. I just wanted to bring this up because, look, we also have Palantir. And, Palantir, a giant data company that allows data science to examine people, millions and millions and millions of people on a very minute level, probably almost as good or not better than some of these people know themselves. They work together. And, of course, Anduril, Palmer Luckey, and Chuck Johnson also works at Anduril. Yeah, Chuck.
Well, can we talk about Palantir being also from Lord of the Rings?
Oh, and how it was a seeing stone that ultimately corrupted its user? Yeah.
But Palantir is named after a jewel in or something in Lord of the Rings.
I don't want to be examined by any of this. Minutely or otherwise.
Palantir is a cancer, metastasizing cancer that has infiltrated literally every single three-letter agency in the government and an enormous amount of our law enforcement. I mean, just so many of these, like the New York Police Department has been using Palantir's bullshit for decades. It's time to root this bullshit out. Peter Thiel set up Palantir to profit from suffering and death, and then he creates ops to create suffering and death.
And the reason I'm showing this picture right now, speaking of ops, is that, of course, everyone remembers Representative Rapey McForehead. He is actually married to Ginger Luckey, who is Palmer Luckey's sister. And here's Roger Stone congratulating them on this. And going back to Chuck Johnson and Assange and all of this, I need people to remember that the same time that Peter Thiel was attempting to take down Gawker, Chuck Johnson was attempting to do the same thing. Not only did he do that, but in this article from Forbes, What Happened to Internet Troll Chuck Johnson's Lawsuit, he blatantly lies about being connected to Peter Thiel. And I would point out that a man who is willing to lie about this is willing to lie about a whole bunch of other things. And apparently that's what you have to do to be a member of the cult of the Dork of the Rings. That's what
that was the most hi-fi moment ever.
Yeah.
That
Also,
was hi-fi cranked up to 11.
Holocaust denying.
I just look, every single time we talk about January 6th, we talk about Russian infiltration of our country, we talk about the problems that are occurring. It's every single time it comes back to this.
Oh, hi. Thanks for checking in. I'm still a piece of garbage.
I'm sorry. It does.
It's a morning. It's morning zoo over here, man.
All right, hi-fi. What's next,
All right,
man?
final story this week.
High-Five the Love Sponge with Peter Thiel moment.
Please don't ever refer to me as Love Sponge ever again. That is so gross. Ugh. I need a minute. Hold on. Oh, Love Sponge. My God.
Sorry, bro.
It's okay.
It's
I'll
war.
be okay.
It's war. You know what I'm saying?
I'll be okay. I just. All right. Final story this week. A Tale of Two Spies. And yes, both of these stories are incredibly important because they point to Russia's infiltration of intelligence services. Here we have a Ukrainian lieutenant colonel accused of spying for Putin. And luckily, Business Insider is kind enough to bring us this story with pictures of money and weapons and knuckle dusters, multiple forms of identification. Yes, this is a very serious story. My God, the Russians have infiltrated the Ukrainian intelligence services. However, I also need to point out that they also covered the infiltration of American intelligence services, particularly the FBI, with this lovely, titillating article about Charles McGonagall's extramarital affair, clutch pearls. The coverage that is given to an American story of this importance when they are willing to show such incendiary photos for Ukraine. But here, let's talk about who the guy's stooping is absolutely ridiculous. And that is why it matters.
He said stooping, so I got nothing.
Yeah, where are you gonna go after stooping? He managed again to get it into the podcast. So great job.
Thank you very much.
You were gonna say something serious, Jim.
I'm gonna say something serious in Hellscape about
let's do it.
Article.
Let's do it.
Oh yeah,
Let's do it.
Jim Stewartson's Hellscape. Oh, fuck.
This week has been fascinating for a whole lot of reasons, but I want to talk about Charles McGonagall and how that connects to basically everything that we have been saying since we started this show, since I started doing this 2.5 years ago, and since Heidi and our guest Craig Unger have been doing for even longer. Charles McGonagall was head of counterintelligence at the New York office of the FBI. McGonagall is also the one who was pushing to reopen Hillary Clinton's emails. That cost her the election. Who did that? Who enabled Donald Trump to win the election because of reopening the emails? James Comey, the actual FBI director, listened to the New York field office in his decision to reopen her emails. The New York field office was infiltrated by the fucking Russians. So when are we collectively going to get it through our fucking head that 2016 was stolen? I don't know, 6 months ago, did this video that we'll show here of the all of the pieces of the puzzle that led to that moment. That led to the moment of James Comey reopening her emails. I'm going to explain how Mike Flynn stole the 2016 election from Hillary Clinton in 2 minutes. You can find all the references at the link below. Why did this guy become president? This guy wanted him to be. Genocidal neo-Nazi Alexander Dugin is also known as Putin's brain. He created Putin's imperialist strategy, which is being carried out in Ukraine right now. The strategy is called Eurasianism, which means Russia will control all of Europe and Asia, with Moscow as the third Rome. Key to this strategy is the country of Turkey. In 2015, Dugin ran an operation to compromise a Turkish general and gain influence over Turkish President Erdogan. In July 2016, Erdogan and Dugin orchestrated a false flag coup that gave Erdogan an excuse to crack down on his political opponents, including Fethullah Gulen, who has lived in the United States since 1999. They falsely accused Gulen of orchestrating the coup. The Turkish general then became a mouthpiece for Dugin and Putin. His name is Ismail Haki Pekin. Pekin worked for Flynn Intel Group through a guy named Bijan Kian, who was indicted for conspiracy in 2018 with this guy, Ekem Optekin, who was a direct contractor to the Russian government and set up a company specifically to run operations on behalf of Erdogan. That company, called Novo, paid Mike Flynn more than $500,000 for services rendered at the end of 2015. $28,000 of that money went to this guy, ex-FBI agent Bryan McCauley. One of the things McCauley did was tell a false story about Hillary Clinton's emails. Politico or the Post dutifully broadcast the lie. This led to a pressure campaign on James Comey, who made the catastrophic decision to reopen Hillary's email investigation 11 days before the election, costing her the presidency. Arrest Mike Flynn. I just need to say this. James Comey said that he was mildly nauseous. Really, James Comey, do you want to reevaluate your assessment of feeling mildly nauseous at putting the entire fucking country and the entire planet through 4 years of Donald Trump? Where are you, Comey? After all your highfalutin talk about how you're just trying to do the right thing and it's so difficult, you gave the election to a Russian puppet. And you said that made you feel mildly nauseous. I want James Comey to come out of whatever the fuck retirement he is and explain to the American people what happened. We need accountability for that moment. We need accountability for the last 6 years of torment and trauma from all these goddamn infiltration operations. Now that we see it at the very top, literally very top of law enforcement, when are we going to figure this out? Now, as everyone knows, I have a particular bone to pick in this fight, and it has to do with Mike Flynn. One second. And how he was involved in this. Mike Flynn paid ex-FBI agent Brian McCauley $28,000 right before the election to make up a story about Hillary Clinton's emails, about the laptop that she had that supposedly had new Anthony Weiner emails on it. Anthony Weiner has been a target of Breitbart and these Russian controlled operations for a fucking decade. Anybody in their right mind would have known in 2016 that if you're bringing up Anthony Weiner, you're just bringing up propaganda designed specifically to tag Hillary Clinton, based on an aide who had a shitty husband. Mike Flynn paid McCauley $28,000. McCauley went to the press, said all kinds of lies about it. The FBI office backed it up, and James Comey, 11 days before the election, tanked Hillary Clinton's candidacy for president. The most qualified person to ever run for office didn't win because James Comey listened to a Russian spy. I'm sorry to get a little bit louder about this, but it's important. If we understand what happened in 2016, right? If we can get it through our head collectively that a crime was committed, the worst political crime in American history was committed in 2016, leading to 3 Trump justices on the Supreme Court who are now in the process of taking away your rights and my rights and Heidi's rights and the rights of anyone who isn't a Christian white man. The rot that we're all experiencing right now, the trauma that we're all experiencing right now, comes from an original sin in 2016 where our election was stolen by domestic terrorists and traitors with the help of foreign powers. We have to come to grips with it. I'm going to keep doing everything in my power to make sure people understand. And for fuck's sake, arrest Mike Flynn.
When the Trump campaign was caught colluding with Russia, the American people were promised a counterintelligence investigation.
The FBI is investigating the Russian government.
But the Trump Justice Department quashed it. Now, for the first time, hear the true story of Donald Trump's Russian recruitment, told from inside the KGB. While Trump is gone, the Russian operation never ended, and as Americans, we cannot move on until we understand the lies, corruption, and blackmail that compromised the most powerful nation on earth. From best-selling author Craig Unger, American Kompromat.
Oh, Mr. Craig Unger, we are so grateful to have you back. We were just saying that we've had very few guests on 3 times, and you honor us being here. And particularly, we thought there was no better person to bring on during this week, where we learn everything that we've all been reporting is real. The Russia operation to install Trump is very real. And I really think that when I was reviewing the film Active Measures, which you were interviewed in, our friend Jack A. Bryan's film, you said something very important and very prescient. You said that you believe that this is most likely the biggest intelligence breach in American history. Can we just start there and then walk our viewers through some of the findings from your books?
Right. Well, I mean, I think it is staggering that, I mean, because as I say, and I think I show in American Kompromat, Donald Trump was a Russian asset, and he was cultivated by the KGB going way back to the 80s. And, you know, I grew up, the big film when I was in high school was Manchurian Candidate. And it seemed just so over the top. I mean, I loved it. If you haven't seen it, you really should watch the original. But it seemed this conspiratorial paranoia applied to American politics just seems really so over the top that nothing like that could ever possibly happen here. And yet, I mean, it's one of the things I show in American Kompromat, how in 1980, Trump bought his first TV sets for his first big successful project, the Grand Hyatt Hotel in Manhattan. And like any hotel, it needed hundreds of TV sets, and he ends up buying it from a place that's really a KGB front. And that's when it all began.
Wow. Well, would you please tell our viewers who still don't quite understand that Russia is not a hoax and very real, what some of the most important findings from your books and your archives that they really need to know about to understand what kind of situation we find ourselves in?
Well, one is that they own him. Russia really owns him, and the myth of Trump as a great businessman is really ridiculous. His very first project was successful, the Grand Hyatt Hotel. He got spectacular tax abatements for that. But other than that, he had bankruptcy after bankruptcy after bankruptcy when he overexpanded into Atlantic City. And he was bailed out again and again by the Russians. And I start out in 1984, there was a Russian mobster named David Bogadin who met with Trump in Trump Tower. That's at 721 Fifth Avenue. That was, at the time, it had just opened. This has been his crown jewel of his empire for 40 years, where he actually lived most of the time. And a Russian mobster comes in and puts $6 million on the table and says, I'll take 5 condos. Well, Trump, in doing that, is laundering money for the Russian mafia. He's selling up to anonymous limited liability companies in all cash transactions. And it turns out Trump did that with at least 1,300 condos. And as you know, I mean, I've never seen any Trump condo go for under $1 million. So you're talking possibly in the billions of dollars when it comes to money laundering, certainly hundreds and hundreds of millions. And that's one way in which he had ties with the Russian mafia, and the Russian mafia is part of Russian intelligence. They're not at odds with it. They are an instrument of Russian intelligence. And it means you're in Vladimir Putin's radar screen. It was the KGB, now it's the FSB, but it's really the same thing.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Well, I've got a million questions, but gentlemen, jump in.
I wanted to ask your thoughts about the recent revelation that Charles McGonagall, head of the New York FBI, was indicted basically for being a Russian spy. This is particularly pertinent because the New York FBI was involved in reopening Hillary Clinton's emails, which arguably cost her the election. I don't even know if it's arguable, but how does Charles McGonagall, the revelations about Charles McGonagall, fit into your overall framework?
Well, it really is a huge revelation. And as I was writing these last two books, I kept thinking, gee, maybe I should be writing about the FBI. Maybe that's the real problem. And I mean, I decided Trump was a bigger target, but you know, one of the first things I discovered was that William Sessions, who had been director of the FBI, when he retired, he became the lawyer for Semyon Mogilevich, who was on the FBI's most wanted list. And you have to, so just imagine for a moment that you're a young FBI special agent investigating the Russian mafia, and you notice that your former boss is their lawyer. What does that do to you? Where does that tell you? And if you're going to look for a job after retirement when you get your pension, and a lot of those FBI guys retire after 20 years, they see themselves going in the directions of William Sessions. And that's exactly what happened again with another director of the FBI, Louis Freeh, who ended up working for Prevazon, who were sort of the Russian guys in the whole Magnitsky affair with Bill Browder and so forth.
Amazing.
So that alone was amazing. There are other former FBI agents who worked for Donald Trump. There was the late James Kallstrom was head of the New York office, and he was very close to McGonagall. And he was part of what I called the Giuliani wing, but he was also close to Donald Trump. I've seen outtakes from a documentary in which Kallstrom was interviewed saying, oh, how close he was with Donald Trump. Trump gave $1.3 million to Kallstrom's favorite charity. And remember, Trump was famously parsimonious when it came to actually delivering his charitable contributions. $1.3 million was quite a sum. This is 50 years ago. And Kallstrom said they talked roughly once a week as friends over the next 40 years. Well, for me, that's a close friend, someone I talk to that regularly. And he was close to McGonagall. And you can see McGonagall is head of counterintelligence. This is one thing that has always baffled me, because for both of my books, I relied on FBI files to some extent. And if I can get the FBI files, I think the FBI should be able to get them.
It's incredible. I think nobody is better to understand and talk about this subject matter, because really you have methodically in each of your books shown the connections, like you said, from intelligence sources, from, also global sources, from KGB sources. I mean, on and on. And I think it's really important to note when you talk about the kind of rot that you're really alluding to, that people like Bob Dole took, $560,000 to help Oleg Deripaska out, a Russian oligarch, in order to help him with his little visa problem, when apparently our intelligence agencies knew his ties with organized crime. And then Deripaska continually resurfaces. Paul Manafort obviously is connected to him. Paul Manafort works for Trump, as his campaign manager. And now we find Deripaska is part of this saga that broke this week. Is there anything you can tell our viewers so they can really understand this is an operation?
Right. Well, you can see how it works if you look what Deripaska and Paul Manafort did in Ukraine after 2000, and when they elected Yanukovych, who was a puppet for Vladimir Putin, and Deripaska was funneling, Putin's other oligarchs were funneling money into to Manafort, as much as $75 million.
Yeah. And
they elected Yanukovych, who was a complete fraud and a puppet for Vladimir Putin. And he was eventually overthrown in the events of 2014. And then again, you had the same thing going on with Manafort becoming campaign manager for Donald Trump, helping elect him president, and putting a Putin puppet. And you remember the meetings in Trump Tower in the summer of 2016 with Manafort and the various oligarchs who came there. I mean, this is an operation. Deripaska is an exceedingly important figure in it. That he was paying off the FBI. I mean, he was one of the chief targets of the investigation, and he's paying them off. And I think for McGonagall, this is a question of treason.
It's absolutely baffling. I sent the guys a picture of McGonagall last night where somebody got a close up of his face and his eyes. And I looked at those eyes, and that to me looked like a man in a hell of a lot of trouble. And really, this breaking story, I knew as soon as it broke that we were going to be distracted with violence, distracted with news porn, distracted with these chaos agents in Congress. But why is it so important that people pay attention to this story, which is revealing a far greater operation?
Just look at the results of the 2016 election and look at what the New York Times did. And I think they should be ashamed of their coverage because they ran that famous headline citing Comey saying that there was no evidence of collusion. I think if we go back, we will see that the editor of the Times, Dean Beckett, talked directly with Comey, who reassured him that was the case, and Comey was likely getting his information directly from Charles McGonagall, who was on the payroll of Deripaska.
Oh my God.
Okay,
High five.
I have a question. So I am a technology person, and I am big into networking, and I like, identifying cables that plug things into each other, right? David Bogatin, former Air Force pilot in Russia, Russian mob. His brother was busted for running $150 million stock scam for Semyon Mogilevich.
Right.
In 2015, Trump's Taj Mahal had to settle with FinCEN for, I believe it was $10 million for not paying attention to their money laundering scam.
Right.
Do you think that McGonagall, being where he was, had an impact on Semyon Mogilevich being removed from the FBI's top 10 wanted list, given that their excuse was, he lives in a non-extradition country?
Right. I honestly don't know the answer to that question, but one of the things that this raises to me, because I was, when I first got started on House of Trump, House of Putin, it was the money laundering that intrigued me. And I realized that this is an open secret, really. The New York State Attorney General investigated. I called them. It's like, yeah, it was happening. A man named Robert Friedman wrote about it in a book called Red Mafia long before Trump had a real political career. One of the real problems here, I think, has been these investigations by the FBI have been all criminal investigations when they should have been counterintelligence investigations. Yes. That was McGonagall's job. And it's very hard to make a case against even Trump for money laundering, or so I'm told, because you have to prove his state of mind that he knew the money was coming from illicit sources, when Trump is smart enough to not ask where the money's coming from. He just doesn't want to know. You put $5 million on his desk, he takes it. He doesn't say, did you get it from sex trafficking or anything?
Wow.
Say he doesn't know. Well, that's all good and well, but is it okay for the President of the United States to have made a fortune laundering money for the Russian mafia?
No.
Shouldn't that be a scandal? Or do we just...
You would think. You would think.
Doesn't that compromise you? And it certainly does in terms of national security. And that's what counterintelligence is about. And the FBI failed miserably.
Oh, my God. Go ahead, Jim.
I just wanted to, speaking of failing miserably in counterintelligence, Mike Flynn was head of the Defense Intelligence Agency in 2013 and 14 when Putin took Crimea. And then Manafort and Flynn cooperated on the campaign, on Hillary's campaign, where all Manafort did was, the only change to the Republican platform was to take the pro-Ukraine language out of their platform in the 2016 election. Mike Flynn additionally paid ex-FBI agent Bryan McCauley $28,000 to back up the New York FBI's story about Hillary Clinton's emails, which caused Comey to reopen her investigation. I just wanted to get your thoughts on Mike Flynn.
Yeah, I've never really been a specialist in Flynn, to be honest, but it looks horrifying on the face. The problem is, I mean, I've called the Republican Party the party of Putin, and it is so widespread, it is unbelievable. Mm-hmm. And, you can see this has been going on much longer and deeper, and the amount of the cyber warfare going on under the surface, and it will continue. It will continue.
Yeah. Yes. And Flynn's an expert in cyber warfare. He's been doing it for 3 decades.
Yes.
I would, we talk about long and deep ties, and here's a question I have for you. Do you find it troubling that the current head of the FBI, Christopher Wray, when he worked at King and Spalding, his prior law firm, that firm represented Russian oil companies and oligarchs?
Right. Yeah, and I've written more about it with Kirkland and Ellis and Jones and Day are 2 huge Washington firms. I think Jones and Day is the biggest firm in the world. But they have massive representation of multi-billionaire Russian clients. And you saw in William Barr was a member, half of the Trump Justice Department were people from Jones and Day. And then when you went into the White House counsel, they were from Kirkland and Ellis. And then when you went into the White House counsel's office, there were a lot of people from Jones and Day. So you effectively were meeting with lawyers representing some of these people had all the Russian clients who were effectively proxies for Vladimir Putin. And
yes.
Huge conflict of interest.
Yes. And we're talking about intelligence breaches, but I also want to talk about the breaches in the Fourth Estate and in media, which is an area of your expertise. When I was at the Women's March on Washington, January 21st, 2017, and I had to walk past the museum, and I had to walk past all the headlines celebrating the Trump election when I knew a fraud had been perpetuated on our country. I didn't know all the details, but I looked and I saw the coverage, and I just my heart sunk. That is not the journalism that I grew up with, and not what I was trained to do. And we talk about the New York Times and their butthurt emails, ongoing saga. But when you saw Donald Trump coming up and you were at New York Magazine, can you kind of give our viewers a recap, because we've discussed this before, on what was happening, that journalists were turning a blind eye to the work that that you were doing, and Wayne Barrett was doing, and Karen DeWeesha was doing, and reporters out of Russia were doing? What happened?
Right. Well, I mean, journalists are, one of the great problems in journalism is what we call access journalism. Yeah. And essentially, if you're good close to Henry Kissinger, you have a career. You have, you can get stories get a good job at the New York Times, wherever, because you have access to a really important source.
Yeah.
But the problem with that is it's an implicit deal where you end up carrying water for them. Henry Kissinger won't want to talk to me because he likes me or he needs a friend. He wants you to carry water for him and put stories out there. And that's been true of the powers that be. And you started to see it really change in the Reagan era. I started out in journalism, and the journalism that helped shape me were Seymour Hersh uncovering the My Lai massacre, the Pentagon Papers, and of course Watergate. That's what was going on when I was in college and just starting out. But by the 80s, when Reagan took office, the glamour became seductive to an awful lot of people. I was at Vanity Fair at the time. I went from New York Magazine to Vanity Fair, and I could see the birth of this sort of glamour, high society, whatever you want to call it. People liked hanging out with Donald Trump. It was fun. You saw this great fantasy life close up. And I think a lot of people sort of sold their souls to do that kind of thing, and they had decent careers for a while, but they ended up helping put together the myth of this monster. I was at New York Magazine at the time, and they were doing one puff piece after another. And
there you have it.
Yeah.
There it is. There it is. Thank you for that. I think that's a very important, note. Yes, Hi-Fi.
To return to the law offices that are representing these oligarchs and their ties to Trump, there is an individual named Joe Lowe and the 1MDB scandal. You may have heard of it. He was recently, in 2021, he was charged with back channel communications and funneling millions of dollars illegally into the Trump campaign in an attempt to get them to drop the case against him, get the Department of Justice to drop the case against him, and to also effect the removal of a Chinese dissident from America back to China. The reason I bring this up is because the law firm that is representing him is in Washington, D.C., called Cobre and Kim. Cobre and Kim has recently signed on Roman Abramovich. What would you say to these lawyers who are continuously taking up the cases of these obviously corrupt, internationally connected billionaires who are gutting governments and hurting their people?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's parallel to a lot of what happened just as World War II was starting. I mean, you had a lot of people doing business with the Nazis in Germany and continued after they should have stopped. And by now, this has gotten to a place where obviously we do have open warfare in Ukraine, and it should be obvious to everyone what Putin is about. And if you are representing them, you are in his pocket. And I think that's really against American interests.
Can you just talk for a second? When people bring up Russian influence on American politics, one of the objections is, "Oh, so why are you calling everyone a Russian?" It's almost never about Russian nationals, right? It's almost never about Igor in St. Petersburg trolling Hillary Clinton, right? It's about Americans who are compromised by Russian influence. Hardly ever, again, a Russian national. No, they're very rarely literal Russians running around on Twitter influencing things. It's Americans. At least that's my view, and I wanted to double check that your impression.
Right. Now, well, I guess, I mean, I've done my reporting mostly on Americans because, well, Trump was president. Yeah. And I also wanted to show how widespread it was at lower levels as well. I do think that, if you go to the law firm, there's an awful lot of Russian money going into Kirkland and Ellis and Jones Day. So there has been a spigot there that is quite real. I mean, I haven't checked since the sanctions were toughened how much that's been cut off.
Yes, well, I think that what Jim is also getting at is that even with this breaker this week that shows how real the Russian operation to install Trump was, and even with all of the revelations in the Mueller report, which shows Trump's pro bono, campaign manager trying to get whole with Deripaska, who he owed money to, which is unbelievable because of how much money he was continually paid, we still have those 30 million plus people in denial about Russia and its influence. And I just did a whole entire piece that these gentlemen helped me with that looked at some of the global chaos and destabilization events related to Russian active measures. Is there anything that you can say to help penetrate that wall of denial that continues to permeate the American, psyche? Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's been really depressing about being a journalist these last 50 years is you see it's increasingly difficult, even when you have a great story, to make it part of the national conversation.
Yeah.
That is, I mean, I thought showing that the president of the United States was a Russian asset, that should be part of the national conversation, but it's not. I mean, it's briefly on the Times bestseller list, but you do what you can. And part of what's happened in the media is it's been fragmented and atomized again and again over the years. I mean, when I started out, there were 3 TV channels. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are thousands, not to mention the internet, and then social media comes along and atomizes it even further so that everyone's confined to their own little silo. And it's very hard to penetrate those silos. What I write about, I'm not going to kid myself, but it's not getting inside the world of Breitbart and Fox News at all, or QAnon.
Yeah.
I don't know how you penetrate those silos. I think social media really needs to be regulated, and it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Social media, one of the things that's enormously frustrating to me is, I can be sued for libel, and that's as it should be. But if you write books or for newspapers or anything, you can be sued for libel. But Facebook and Twitter say they're not media companies, they're technology companies. And they're not responsible for anything on their platform.
That's amazing.
And if they were, I think we'd have a lot more accuracy there.
It's just
and that is one thing that is very, very important because on one of our discussions, you and I talked about the infiltration of Russia in Silicon Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is being done is that Section 230 is being abused consistently.
Right.
So here's a question I have for you. We have these obvious cognitive warfare tactics being run against Americans, right? Messing with people's minds. It is obvious that this is occurring globally, as evidenced by the attempted coup in Brazil recently.
Right.
How do we get the President of the United States and NATO to explain to the populace that Russia, as Keir Giles has said, is at war with everybody?
Hacking our brains.
How do we do that?
Right. Well, I don't have an easy answer to that. I do think one good sign is just that I think I was thrilled with how Biden drew to get NATO back together after Trump had nearly destroyed it. And but I think you're right that we have to go further, and that we have to think in terms of redefining warfare. I mean, it's quite interesting to me because the hybrid warfare Russia has done has been 1,000 times more successful, fast in military warfare, and yet in Ukraine, that's what they resort to. I thought they had better luck with Yanukovych than they've had since in the last year using these their military. But we are in a virtual warfare, and I've been saying that since, years. And
You said it. You said it best, Craig. You said until we have a shared narrative of truth in America, we will continue to be under this kind of assault. And you said that years ago. And I was up late last night watching my friend Melissa Jo Peltier's documentary where she interviewed all of these former Trump supporters who are no longer Trump supporters. And each of them had a moment in time where something happened where they could finally break through the lies. But there was a chilling moment where somebody went and interviewed 40 people in line at a Trump rally and asked one question: do you believe Trump has ever lied? And in every instance, they all said, no, he's never lied. He's never lied once. And so I think that is what we're up against. The reporting that Jim does is always on that kind of cultic aspect of all of this, right. that he always says no one brainwashes themselves. But I think you're absolutely right. There is, cognitive warfare. We talk about it a lot. The human mind is the battlefield, and we need Western leaders to stand up and tell their citizens what is happening, so at least we can begin to get through the denial of it. Because if you have all these people who think that Trump's never lied once because of the cognitive dissonance that would, cause them, then, what are we doing?
I would also like to offer the fact that cognitive warfare is in fact warfare, and warfare costs money, and that is why the money laundering is so very, very important.
Right, and it's just been amazingly effective, and I don't know. I don't know what the next phase of this is, and I think people have to get used to the fact that Trump may or may not be over, but even if he is over, this will continue, I think, and we have to defend against it.
Yeah, I mean they have literally created a cult around Trump, but Trump is just a replaceable cult leader, right? They're already beginning to kind of fragment away from him, as I knew they would, because the Republicans know that Donald Trump is just a feckless puppet of Putin, and I think they want somebody more dynamic in the role at this point. Like Heidi and Hi-Fi were saying, I think the greatest negligence of our current administration, and I think Biden, by most measures, has been amazing, but failing to explain to the American people what's happening to them, that all of this disinformation and propaganda that's coming into their living rooms is warfare. It is literal warfare. It may not be kinetic, but it's information warfare coming from a foreign power. And in my opinion, it is negligent and irresponsible not to tell people that they're being assaulted.
Right, and I really do think we have to regulate Silicon Valley as part of it. And if we don't, we will never be able to have one shared narrative.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, social media should be regulated like a utility. At this point, the connection to other people and to the internet is a vital human service, right? Almost like water or electricity or something like that, right? Because it actually is the thing that feeds most people's minds. And I see no reason why our minds shouldn't be protected in the same way that our bodies are, through, Clean Water Acts and things like that.
So I have a question for you, Craig.
Yeah.
And this is going to get back more into your wheelhouse. Let's talk about some of the people you talk to from Russia, specifically one of my favorite people, Yuri Shvets. I love Yuri. I catch him on Instagram all the time. I would ask, if you talk to him, could he do English subtitles? Because translating his Russian is so very difficult. But
Yeah,
let's talk about your sources.
And I wish he would use subtitles, because I obviously I don't speak Russian. I haven't talked to him in a few weeks, but I will ask him if he can use subtitles. Right?
They have AI for that now, so that should be absolutely doable.
He's got quite a following. I think he's got a couple million followers in Russia.
Wow.
Tell us about Yuri.
That's amazing.
Yuri is he's a couple of years younger than I am. He's very smart. He you can tell he's very professional. He's very disciplined. I found him very direct and straightforward, and he really fun to be with. Really, I mean, he was he knows what's going on, and he told me, you know, I mean, for me, I was talking about his past, and because he was a major in the KGB, he worked his way up. Initially, he sort of believed in what he was doing, and in the mid-'80s, he was stationed in Washington to recruit Americans as spies, and he did that. The most interesting thing came in 1987, really, when he went back to Russia to sort of groom a Western, it was actually an Australian guy living in America, who he was cultivating as a spy. And at the same time he was doing that, Yuri had been based in Washington Station, and his colleagues in New York Station were grooming a new asset named Donald Trump. So this was Trump's first trip to the what was then the Soviet Union. Went with his wife, his first wife, Ivana, rather, I'm sorry. And while he was there, he didn't tell, Trump doesn't tell us, of course, everything that he did while he was there. But when he came back, he was spouting all these new slogans. And Yuri explained to me, this is what you do with your new assets. You talk to them. You plant little ideas in their head. You say how marvelous you're an unorthodox your foreign policy ideas are. And Trump came back, and astoundingly, very few people realize this, but it was 1988. The 1988 presidential elections were just starting. Ronald Reagan was finishing his second term, and obviously George H.W. Bush Sr. Was the presumed nominee, but Trump decided to at least put his toes in the water, and he went to New Hampshire, and he did what you do if you're going to be a presidential candidate. Wow. And one of the things he did was he took out a full-page ad in the Washington Post, New York Times, and Boston Globe, and it had all these wacky, crazy foreign policy ideas like, we've got NATO is destroying the United States. We really should get out of it. We should not be allied with Japan at all. All this stuff. And Yuri was laughing when he was telling me about it. So those were our KGB talking points. And sure enough, Yuri, who was in Moscow at the time at KGB headquarters, gets a cable from the Active Measures Division celebrating the acquisition of a new asset. And they tell the story, and they attach a full-page ad from the New York Times and Washington Post signed by Donald J. Trump.
Unbelievable. I want you to, I've been trying to, in my personal writings, remind people of the great giant reporters who came before us. And I think of Wayne Barrett as one of them, an investigative reporter from New York. And you told us that Wayne Barrett used to call Donald Trump a user of users. And you also probably know and can telegraph Trump's moves probably better than anybody because you've studied him. And this really is, I think, much of your life's work. So knowing the kind of week that we had, I'm already seeing some clips showing him in a burnt sienna color, looking kind of like it's a Russian hostage video, saying, I'm not a Russian, agent. And What do you think Trump will do next in light of the fact that there's, I think, irrefutable evidence that an operation was run in this country by Russia to install him?
Right. I'm trying to think. The game, it becomes a chess game, and it's kind of hard to predict every move, but partly because of his legal. I mean, he's in grave legal jeopardy, and I think, I don't like to make predictions, but I think he'll get at least some indictment somewhere. Finally, I mean, it's been going on forever, and that is part of the equation. So I don't really understand how every move he makes might affect his legal jeopardy, but it's one reason I think he's going to stay in the. He at least says he's running for president. One question coming up very soon is, will he get back on Twitter, which would sort of hurt his Truth Social platform and admit that it's not cutting it. But God, I don't know. I can't predict his every move. I think he's increasingly desperate is a problem.
Yes, and that's why I ask you that, because we just learned from our previous guest, Dr. Mia Bloom, who studied radicalization for 30 years and is brilliant, that what they say on their propaganda platforms like Truth Social and what they say in a court of law are two totally different things. And by they, we're talking about, the Mike Flynns and the Roger Stones and,
right.
All of these characters. And so I think that, I think you're right. He does appear to look increasingly desperate. And I think you're also right. Like, we need to see indictments. I mean, that's been the cornerstone of this entire show. It's like, we need to see high-level indictments. And with what just happened this week, I'm a bit not nervous, but just, on edge. When Merrick Garland said that this is the biggest, investigation ever undertaken by the Department of Justice, I think the flip side is that because, potentially so much of our intelligence agencies have been infected.
Can I give one tiny bit of good news?
Yes.
Yeah.
American Kompromat is currently trending on Twitter.
As it should be. Thank you.
Well done. That is actually,
it's awesome. It's like Kompromat, and then when you click on it, it's you and your book.
So that is actually a great point. With all that you've been through, and knowing that really, quite frankly, there was a lot of, I think, underreporting by corporate media on your work, shall we say. Do you feel vindicated this week? Like, how are you feeling?
Well, I mean, to be honest, before my books go to print, one is I hire a fact checker who worked at the New Yorker, and it's very, very rigorously checked by someone who's not been part of the process and can see it with a fresh eye. So I'm pretty solid about things. And then it's vetted by the publishing house. So, Penguin Random House had their top lawyers vetting the whole manuscript. So before it comes out, I'm pretty confident about everything in it. What is distressing is what we were talking about earlier, that I want it to be part of the national conversation because I think it's important. And yes, I would like to sell books too, but it's important that America understand this. It's important that we accept the darker parts of our past. And I think we have a history of turning a blind eye to them again and again and again. And that's what's been going on. What my last 5 books have been about in one way or another.
Oh man, Craig Unger, that was a beautiful summary. I want to thank you so much for coming on the show again. I see Hi-Fi. Hi-Fi always has one more thing. Hi-Fi's one more thing moment.
I would just like to congratulate you, Craig, on some of the best cognitive warfare I've seen in a hot minute.
Yes.
This post just made me laugh and laugh. And thank you, sir. That's
well, you're very welcome. That's high praise. I appreciate it.
Excellent.
And from me too.
Thank you so much. I guess the one last thing, I have one last thing. Is there anything you're working on that you can let our viewers know about?
It's a way in the future. It'll take more than a year to get it out.
Okay. In the meantime, American Kompromat, House of Trump, House of Putin, all of his books, buy them because you're going to learn everything you need to know about the situation we find ourselves in currently.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate it.
We appreciate you.
Really grateful. Thanks, Craig.
Okay.
Cheers, man.
Man, how can you top Craig Unger, who's been right for years and years and years, and somehow has been dismissed, but you can't dismiss him anymore.
No. Yeah, I mean, he's been right for so long, and he's also so beautifully humble. It's just like he's just a fantastic reporter. And I'm very excited to hear that American Kompromat is trending on.
It's funny how the people who get it right also seem to be good people who care about other humans, right? You know, it's not a coincidence that the people who are doing the work and you know care are the same people, right? Because if you don't give a shit, you're willing to lie. And Craig is a great example of just a good person doing the right thing.
Absolutely. And speaking of good people doing the right thing, I think as we approach the anniversary of the latest kinetic phase of the war in Ukraine that Russia has been waging, I think it's really important that we revisit some of our personal archives. And we have Michael McKay, who's an incredible academic Ukraine expert who has lectured there. And he, on the eve of the war, February 24th, gave me a vital interview. And let's hear a little cut of that.
Actually, I don't like to talk about what Putin says because I know it's all propaganda and so on. But sometimes he lets go what his true motivation is. He says, why am I launching this large military offensive tonight on Ukraine? It's to denazify Ukraine. That's what he said. Now, I know exactly what he means. He means, and this is a threat, I'm going to do to you, Ukraine, what I did to Germany. I'm going to rocket your capital city, like the Red Army did Berlin, until it is rubble. I will enslave your people, as Russia managed to do to Eastern Germany. I will go on a rampage of mass killing and mass rape and deportation, exactly as the Soviet Union. That's what denazification means to them. We think it means, some ideological reorientation, getting a thing. No, that's not what it means to them. It means a war of annihilation, like we've not seen since the Red Army and what they did, or since ancient.